Hey everyone, welcome back. So you really want to get a handle on objectives and key results, huh?
Sounds like it.
And you sent us a ton of stuff to dig through.
Yeah, looks like we've got research papers, articles.
Yeah.
Oh, and even Atlassian's definitive guide to OKRs.
That guide's going to be our main guide for this deep dive, I think.
Makes sense to me.
All right, are you ready to help us navigate this whole OKR landscape and figure out why everyone's so excited about them?
Absolutely. There's a lot of buzz around OKRs, but I think when they're used right, they can be a total game changer.
Especially for agility and focus, right?
For sure.
Okay, so first things first, what are OKRs?
Well, the definitive guide puts it pretty nicely. It's a system for setting those ambitious goals, and then you measure your progress all through the year.
But it's not just like set it and forget it, right?
More like you're actively tracking how you're doing, and you make changes as you go along.
And that's where those two main parts come in, right?
Yep. Objectives and key results.
From what I'm seeing in the sources, objectives are the big picture inspiring stuff.
Yeah. And the key results are the concrete measures that tell you if you're actually making progress.
Exactly. They kind of work together.
Oh.
The guide uses this formula. It says, I will objective as measured by key result.
Oh, that's catchy.
It is.
But how are they different from like MBOs?
Manage them by objectives?
Right. Or KPIs?
Yeah.
Key performance indicators? They all seem like they're about setting goals.
That's a good question. It's an important one, actually. MBOs, they usually focus on hitting those targets that are already set.
Okay.
And KPIs, they track performance across different metrics.
I see.
But OKRs, they're all about stretching for those goals that seem almost impossible, even if you don't hit 100%.
So it's less about hitting a number and more about the journey.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
And it's that growth mindset right there.
It is built right in.
Yeah, and that leads right into why OKRs and agility go together so well.
Okay, here's where it gets interesting. You always talk about how important agility is. And the sources all say how OKRs support that too. But how do they actually work together?
So think about it. Agile is all about adapting and being flexible, right?
Yeah.
Well, OKRs do that same thing, but for your goals, you're not punished for aiming high and maybe not quite getting there.
It actually encourages it.
It does. The guide actually points out 5 ways that OKRs actually boost agility.
Like what?
For example, it says agile teams, they have the power to make decisions and change direction.
Right.
And OKRs support that because they give them a way to make sure those decisions match up with the main goals.
One thing I thought was really cool was that you're not stuck with your first goals.
Oh, yeah.
You can totally change course mid-year if you need to.
Exactly. It's total agility.
It is.
You can think of it like a roadmap,
Okay.
but it's one that you can update as you go.
Oh, I like that.
There's actually a case study in the materials about this.
Really?
This company, they realized that they were measuring the wrong things. So they changed their OKRs halfway through the year, and they ended up being way more successful.
That's amazing.
It shows how important it is to be able to adapt.
Yeah. So we've got these ambitious goals. We're tracking progress. We can even change things up if we need to. But what about bigger companies where not everyone's working on the exact same thing?
That's where the idea of an OKR cascade comes in. Figure 3 in the guide shows this really well. It's basically how goals and key results flow down through the company.
Okay, so starting from the top level and then going down to divisions and teams.
Yeah, exactly.
So say a company wants to increase market share in Asia, what happens next?
Well, leadership would come up with those top-level key results, like maybe increase users by 10%.
Okay.
Then the different divisions, they'd make their own OKRs that match up with the company's goals.
So like the marketing division would focus on building a strong online presence in Asia?
Something like that. And then each team within marketing would break it down even further.
So the Japanese marketing team would be all about generating buzz in Japan with specific numbers to track.
Exactly. Is everyone working towards the same goal, but in a way that makes sense for what they do?
But what about teams whose work doesn't directly connect to those big company objectives?
Like HR.
Yeah, exactly.
The guide actually uses HR as an example. It shows that not every team's OKRs are going to perfectly match the company's objectives.
Right.
So HR, they might have goals about keeping employees happy or improving the company culture.
Oh, that makes sense.
It might not seem related at first.
But a happy workforce means a successful company in every area.
Exactly.
So it actually does make perfect sense.
It does.
It seems like OKRs give you that flexibility while still keeping everyone moving in the same direction.
You got it. It's about that balance between individual team goals and the overall company objectives.
So we've set our ambitious OKRs, we're tracking progress, everyone's on the same page. But how do we know how well we're doing? Is it pass or fail or what?
That's where scoring OKRs comes in. It's a little more complicated than just hitting a number.
Scoring.
Yeah.
Okay, fill me in. What's that all about?
The guide says you score OKRs on a scale of 0 to 1.
Okay,
And checking in and honestly assessing how you're doing is super important.
makes sense. But here's a key thing. Getting a perfect one isn't always the goal. Wait, so even if you don't fully hit your objective, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right. Because remember, it's all about pushing boundaries and setting those goals that seem really tough.
Yeah.
The guide says something like, a 0.7 is considered a success.
Okay, that takes some pressure off.
It does, because it shows that you're pushing yourself without being unrealistic.
But what if your scores are always below 0.6? Should we be worried?
Not necessarily, but it's a sign to stop and think and maybe have some tough conversations.
Yeah.
The guide says to ask questions like, what went wrong? Can we get back on track? Or even, do we need to tweak our key results?
So it's less about beating yourself up over a bad score and more about using it as a way to learn and make changes.
You got it. It's that whole idea of always improving, which is at the heart of OKRs and agility.
All right, so we've covered a lot from what OKRs are to how they connect to agility and even the scoring thing. But before we go too far, don't we need to talk about those potential pitfalls?
You're absolutely right. Even the best systems can be messed up.
And OKRs are no exception.
For sure. The guide actually has a whole section about things to watch out for.
It's like a warning to make sure we're using them the right way.
Yeah, let's talk about those pitfalls.
Okay.
I think knowing what those are will actually help us understand how to use OKRs better.
Okay, first one, setting too many objectives. The guide makes it clear that focus is key.
Definitely. It's so easy to try to do everything at once,
It is.
but if you try to do too much, you just end up spreading yourself too thin, and then no one knows what's important.
Yeah, so how many is too many? What's the magic number?
The guide says to stick with like 3 or 4 main objectives for the year.
Okay.
That lets teams focus on the most important stuff and actually make real progress.
So less is more.
It's exactly.
Another mistake people make is setting OKRs without talking to anyone else.
Like each team comes up with their goals and keeps them secret.
Yeah.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
You're telling me for OKRs to really work, you have to collaborate. Everyone needs to be on the same page.
Yeah.
So you got to share your goals, talk about them, make sure everyone knows what everyone else is doing. That way you can avoid working against each other.
Right. It would be chaos if everyone was just working in their own little bubble.
You said it. Being open and communicating is super important for OKRs to actually work.
Okay, here's one that I think is really important. The guide talks about key results that encourage the wrong behaviors.
Yeah, that's an important point. It's so easy to get caught up in just hitting that number without thinking about the bigger picture.
Or the potential downsides.
Exactly. The guide says you have to choose those key results that create good outcomes for everyone, not just quick wins or hitting some random target.
So it's not just what you measure, but how you measure it.
You got it.
Okay, what's next? Another trap is rigidly cascading OKRs.
Wait a minute, didn't we just talk about how goals should flow from the top down?
We did.
Is this a contradiction?
Not exactly. It's about finding the right balance.
Okay.
Yes, that top-down flow is important, but it shouldn't be the only way. Teams that are actually doing the work, they should be able to give feedback too.
So it's more of a conversation,
Exactly.
not just orders from the top.
The teams on the ground, they often have really valuable insights that should be considered.
Right, like they say the best ideas can come from anywhere.
Exactly. And one last thing, the guide warns against tying OKRs to compensation.
Interesting. I would think that rewarding people for reaching their objectives would be a good thing.
It might seem that way, but it can actually have the opposite effect.
Really?
How so?
Well, if people are scared of losing out on bonuses or promotions, they might not set ambitious goals or take risks. They might play it safe just to hit those targets instead of trying to innovate and grow.
So it actually stifles creativity? Yeah, exactly. The guide says OKRs should be about motivating people from within, where they're driven by the challenge, the opportunity to learn, and the feeling of contributing to something meaningful.
That makes a lot of sense.
It does.
It's about getting everyone working towards the same vision and creating an environment where they feel like they can do their best work, not just chasing a reward.
You nailed it.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have. From the basics of OKRs to how they connect to agility and those potential pitfalls, I feel like we're starting to get a good grasp on this whole OKR thing. I think we've laid a solid foundation. Now we just got to see how it all works in the real world.
In the next part of our discussion, we'll dive into some real examples of how companies are using OKRs to get incredible results.
Sounds good.
Can't wait. Stay tuned, everyone, because we're just getting started.
Welcome back. Glad we can continue this OKR exploration.
Me too. I'm ready to dive back in. We've covered all the theory, the mechanics, even those potential pitfalls. But I'm really curious to see it all in action. How are companies actually using OKRs to hit those goals?
You got it. One of the best examples is Google. They've been using OKR since the very beginning, and a lot of people say that's a big part of their success.
Really? I knew they were big on data and shooting for the moon, but I didn't realize OKRs were so central to their whole culture from day one.
It's pretty amazing how they've made OKRs a part of everything they do. From those big company-wide objectives all the way down to what each team is working on, it creates this shared sense of purpose. It's powerful.
So what kind of objectives would a company like Google set? I mean, their early days were a bit before my time.
Well, back then, one of their main objectives was to build the world's best search engine.
That's a pretty ambitious objective.
It's an understatement, for sure, but it obviously worked out for them. And they used key results to get there. They got super specific with their key results. Things like increase the number of index web pages by a certain percentage, or make search queries faster by a certain number of milliseconds. Measurable actions that directly fed into that big objective.
So it wasn't just about saying we want to be the best. It was about breaking it down into those concrete steps that they could track over time.
Exactly. And it's not just tech giants like Google, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They use OKRs too, to guide their philanthropic work and make the world a better place.
Wow, I never thought about using OKRs in a nonprofit setting. I kind of assumed it was more of a business tool.
It shows how flexible the framework is. You can adapt it to any organization that's got big goals and wants a clear path to reach them. It's about impact, not just profits.
So what kind of objectives would a foundation like that focus on?
One of their big ones has been to reduce childhood mortality in developing countries.
That's huge. It must be incredible to see those OKRs turn into real-world change.
It is. And they track their progress with key results like increased vaccination rates or improve access to clean water. Again, very specific, measurable things that contribute to that larger mission.
It's inspiring to see how OKRs can be used for such a wide range of things, from building a tech empire to tackling global health challenges. But let's get down to brass tacks here. We've seen the theory, those big name examples. What about for the rest of us? Any practical tips for using OKRs in our own organizations? Whether it's a small business or a nonprofit?
Great question. Making OKRs work is about more than just understanding the concept. It's a whole mindset shift and a commitment to building a culture that supports it.
So it's not just about checking boxes and filling out spreadsheets.
Not at all. It's about embracing a whole new way of thinking about goals and progress. One that's all about transparency, collaboration, and always getting better.
Okay, I'm in. Where do we start? What are those first steps to bringing OKRs to life in our own teams or companies?
One of the biggest mistakes is trying to do too much too fast. Don't try to roll out OKRs across the whole organization all at once. It can be overwhelming and just create confusion.
So start small. Maybe pick a team or department to try it out first.
Exactly. That way you can test things out, see what works, what doesn't, and make changes before going big. You can learn from those early experiences and refine your approach.
Makes sense. What else should we keep in mind as we start this OKR journey?
Communication is key. Make sure everyone understands the purpose of OKRs, why you're doing this, and how it all fits into the bigger picture.
Right. It can't just be a top-down order. It has to be a team effort where everyone feels involved and understands how their work contributes to the overall success.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And don't just set them and forget them. You got to check in regularly to keep those OKRs top of mind and make sure everyone's on track.
So how often should we be reviewing progress? Any suggestions?
Monthly check-ins are a good place to start. That gives you a chance to see how things are going. Celebrate wins, catch any roadblocks early, and make adjustments if you need to. Keeps those OKRs front and center.
Sounds doable. What about actually setting those objectives and key results? Are there any guidelines or best practices?
A big one is to get input from the people who will actually be responsible for achieving those goals.
Yeah.
Don't just dictate from the top down.
So more brainstorming, less ordering people around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When people have a say in setting their own objectives, they're way more likely to be committed to reaching them. It creates ownership and accountability.
Makes sense. What about actually writing those objectives and key results? Any tips to make sure they're effective?
Remember that difference we talked about. Objectives, they should be qualitative, aspirational, painting a picture of where you want to go.
Yeah.
Key results need to be quantitative and measurable, giving you concrete ways to track progress.
So increase customer satisfaction would be a good objective, and then something like achieve a net promoter score of 80 would be a solid key result.
You got it. And don't be afraid to aim high. OKRs should be a challenge. They should push teams to go above and beyond what they thought was possible.
So finding that balance between ambitious and realistic.
Exactly. But remember, they're not set in stone. Be ready to adjust them as you learn more, as things change or as priorities shift. That's where agility comes in.
It's not about sticking to a plan no matter what. It's about being flexible and adapting.
You got it. And one last tip. Don't forget to celebrate successes along the way. Recognizing progress keeps people motivated and engaged. It reinforces those good behaviors and creates momentum.
It's not just about reaching the final destination. It's about recognizing the journey and the effort everyone's putting in.
Well said. Celebrating wins, big and small, helps create a positive environment where people feel valued. That leads to even more success.
This is all starting to make sense. These practical tips are super helpful. I'm feeling a lot more confident about actually using OKRs. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'd love to hear about the potential benefits. We've talked about agility and focus, but are there other advantages to using this framework?
Definitely. When done right, OKRs can have a positive impact across the whole organization, leading to all sorts of good things. Like one of the biggest benefits is increased alignment.
Alignment. How do OKRs solve with that?
Well, think about it. When everyone in the company, from the CEO all the way down, is working towards the same clearly defined objectives, it creates this strong sense of unity and purpose. Everyone knows what they're working on and how it all fits together.
So it's not just individual teams working separately. It's about connecting everyone's efforts to a shared vision.
Exactly. And that alignment can lead to more efficiency and productivity. When everyone's pulling in the same direction, there's less wasted effort and more momentum.
Less friction, more energy focused on those short goals. What else?
Another key advantage is improved focus. By setting just a few ambitious objectives, OKRs help teams prioritize what truly matters and avoid getting bogged down in less important stuff. It's all about directing everyone's energy towards those high-impact things that'll make a real difference.
So it's a way to avoid feeling overwhelmed or pulled in too many directions.
Exactly. And by keeping track of progress towards those objectives, teams can quickly figure out what's working and what's not, allowing them to make changes and course correct as needed. Which brings us back to agility.
Right, being able to adapt and respond to change quickly and effectively. It sounds like OKRs really do create a win-win for everyone.
They can. But remember, it's not just about the framework. It's about using it to build a culture of transparency, accountability, and continuous improvement.
It's the human element that makes it work. The commitment to working together, communicating openly, and always striving for better.
Well said. OKRs can be a powerful tool for positive change, but they're only as good as the people using them.
We've really covered a lot in this part of our deep dive. From seeing OKRs in action to those practical tips and a deeper look at the benefits, I feel like we've gotten a much better understanding of how OKRs work and why they matter.
We've explored the power of this framework and how you can use it to reach big goals, build alignment, and drive continuous improvement. But there's one last piece to this puzzle: the ongoing journey of using OKRs effectively.
I knew there had to be more. Okay, what else do we need to know to make the most of this OKR adventure?
That's what we'll unpack in the final part of our deep dive,
Okay, we're back for the last part of our OKR deep dive.
the grand finale.
We've talked about what OKRs are, how they work, those real-world examples, and even how to actually put them into practice. But you mentioned there's more to it than just following the steps. What's the key to really making OKRs come to life and create real change?
It's not so much a secret ingredient as a shift in how you think and how your company's culture works. OKRs, they're just a tool. They're only as good as the people using them and the environment where they're being used.
So it's not enough to just set those objectives and key results and then just check in once a month.
Right.
You're saying we need to create a certain way of thinking and working to really make them work.
Exactly. It's kind of like planting a seed. You can give it water, sunlight, all that.
Right.
But it still needs the right soil and conditions to grow. OKRs are the same way.
I love that analogy.
Right.
So what are those essential things that make up that fertile soil that lets OKRs really thrive?
One of the most important things is leadership. Leaders need to be the champions of this new way of working. They have to set the example.
So it's not just about telling people to set OKRs.
Nope.
Leaders have to actually do it themselves. be open about their own goals, and show everyone they're committed to constantly improving.
Absolutely. When leaders do that, it creates this ripple effect through the whole organization. It sets the tone for a culture where everyone feels comfortable talking openly, being accountable, and being willing to learn and grow.
That makes sense. We talked about how OKRs encourage taking risks and aiming high, but that only works if people feel like they can experiment and even fail sometimes without being punished.
Exactly. Psychological safety is crucial. For OKRs to really work, people need to feel like they can speak their mind, share ideas, and even admit mistakes without being afraid.
So creating that environment of trust and openness is just as important as setting the objectives themselves.
I'd say it's even more important. It's the foundation that everything else is built on.
And that connects back to that idea of continuous improvement, right?
Yeah,
Checking in regularly, being honest about what's working and what's not, and being willing to change things up as you go.
exactly. And that requires a growth mindset,
Yeah.
both individually and as a team. Embracing that idea that we're all always learning, growing, trying to be better is essential for making OKRs a lasting part of your culture.
So it's about creating a culture of being curious, experimenting, and not being afraid to challenge how things are done.
Right.
It's about seeing setbacks as chances to learn, not as failures.
Exactly. And that leads me to another important point. Don't be scared to change things up with the OKR framework itself.
Wait a minute, I thought we were supposed to follow this system. Are
Yeah.
you saying we can change the rules?
Not the main principles, but how you use those principles can change as your organization grows and learns. What works for one team might not work for another. And what works today might not work as well next year.
So it's about finding the right balance for your situation, experimenting and constantly refining your approach. OKRs aren't one size fits all. They're more like guidelines that you can adjust what you need.
Exactly. And that's how you become truly agile. Being flexible, adaptable, always looking for ways to do better.
This has been such an amazing journey. We started feeling a little lost with all this OKR stuff, but now we have a better understanding of not just how the framework works, but also the changes in mindset and company culture that are so important for making it all work.
We've really dug into how powerful this framework is and how you can use it to reach big goals, get everyone on the same page, and keep getting better.
Okay, before we wrap things up, what's one last thought you want to leave our listeners with as they start their own OKR journey?
Don't get too caught up in the tools and processes. The real magic of OKRs is how they can help people reach their potential, work together, and create a shared purpose. Focus on that, and the results will follow.
That's awesome. I feel so much more ready to not just implement OKRs, but to really make them part of how our team works. Thanks for taking us on this incredible deep dive.
It was my pleasure. And remember, we're always here to help if you have any questions or need any guidance. Happy goal setting.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll catch you next time.